Hello, hello, and welcome. I've always believed art is a form of self-expression. It is something that has no boundaries or structure. No one is to grade you or rate you. Except for this craft. Now, a ton of folks in their early years go through the lifestyle of judged dance, known as competition. This episode brings us a creator who choreographs for these competitors as well as musical theater. Christine Kowalchik brings her insight to dance, and even if it isn't for competition, she believes that the body is meant to move. She does have an artistic household with her son Xander and husband Alex, who is also a guest on Pique My Interest as a photographer. Also, next to her office in her studio, there is a piano lesson studio adjacent that starts up about halfway through. But it shouldn't distract you from her creativity. This episode was recorded in Missoula, Montana, and some time ago, and published now due to me learning how to edit and publish a podcast, so some info might be a little old, but I hope you can still use all of the information to look up their work and your interest is piqued. Now I hope you're having a wonderful day, and please enjoy this week's episode I've titled, Dance is for Everyone. Hello, my beautiful people, and welcome to Pique My Interest, a podcast dedicated to creativity. My name is Scoop Decker, and I am an artist. This podcast was created to learn more about different styles of art, and more importantly, meet some incredible artists and explore their craft and how they create. I'm currently here with Christine Kowalchik in Missoula, Montana. And Christine, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
A little tired?
Yeah, I'm tired. I'm also ready for the weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually get a day off tomorrow, so that's nice.
Nice.
Which will be
Wonderful.
good.
Been a little busy. I'm sure we'll get into that and why you're tired. Please pique my interest about you. What is your name? What is your craft?
So my name is Christine Kowalchik, and I am a professional choreographer for both musical theater and competitive dance.
Wonderful. And what separates you from other choreographers? What is so different about your choreography?
I would say that I think when I go into a space and I create a piece of work, it's always about highlighting the individual. I don't just come up with a concept and then put it on individuals. I have to be inspired by the individual themselves to create a work that works best for them or highlights them. So I think that's something that, maybe in the future I would be open to being hired out. There's a lot of people in my field that can pay $1,000 and they can come in for I fly them in and they could set pieces of work on my students and then they leave. But right now, all the work I do is inspired by the students that I spend, hours and hours every week with. And each new season or each new piece that I create is inspired by something I saw them do or a piece of music that reminded me of someone individually.
When you're choreographing with your students, what's the goal? What is your ultimate goal? I know you and I have met through musical theater, but right. I know your career has kind of shifted to a new end goal. What is that?
So, for me, I primarily work with students under the age of 18. And so my success is their success, which is ultimately my goal is to create choreography for them that inspires them to keep choreography in their life for the rest of their life. So whether that means it gets them into a collegiate program or it gets them seen by, one of the top professionals in our industry, or it gets them into a trainee program and someday a professional company, it's creating choreography that highlights them and inspires them to keep it in their life forever. Dance itself, not that specific choreography, but sometimes that specific choreography is a catalyst for them to, I really like this style of movement, so maybe I'm really now inspired by, Pacific Northwest Ballet because it's in the Balanchine style of dance, or maybe I'm really, that piece of choreography that you opened up my eyes to Fosse style or something like that.
Mm-hmm. your studio teaches competition, which is very different than a lot of choreography where, like you're talking about, using the students and working with the students to get them to be whatever they want to get out of themselves.
Yeah.
But also, what baffles me in competition is it's not only self-expression, but it's also judged in the end. And you get a rating and you get a score. And
Yeah.
so I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more. But once again, let's learn a little bit about you. What is your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in upstate New York, and then moved to Maine, Kennebunk, Maine, when I was 7 years old, where I started dancing when I was 3, and then when we moved to Maine, I found a smaller studio that was actually a competitive dance studio. Danced there until I was 12, and actually strayed away from competitive dance because I didn't like it anymore and wanted to focus more on my ballet technique, and trained from the age of 12 to 18 at the Maine State School for the Performing Arts, which was a feeder program into the Maine State Ballet, which is a professional ballet company in Maine. And then after that, in high school, I started getting interested in musical theater, and so shifted my focus or my passion a little bit. And so in college, I went to school at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour south of Brooklyn, New York, and 45 minutes north of Philly, to beautifully arts hubs on the East Coast, and double majored in dance with an emphasis in choreography and theater with an emphasis in acting.
Wow.
Yeah.
So all sorts of different dance.
Yeah.
Was there any specific one that you really enjoyed or one that really spoke to you?
Yeah. So actually, my favorite style of dance when I was going into college was, ballet until I was about 17, and then back in the day, which I hate saying because I'm still not that old, but yeah, I studied at Maine State, and I had trained hard enough to become apprentice to the company. And then my senior year, the company director sat me down and said that I was too heavy to be in the company. And I'm only 5'2", and so I was not tall enough. You have to be a minimum of 5'4". And at that time, telling a 17-year-old that they're too heavy, when at the time I think I weighed 127 pounds. Like, I was not a large human, and so, but I didn't fit the mold. So my senior year, they always called me a jazzerina. I could do everything. I could turn and jump. That's what I was good at. And so going into college, I just kind of put ballet aside because I had been so broken by it. And then had an instructor in college that taught African dance. And he did like an African modern fusion. His name was Charles O. Anderson. And he kind of inspired me. And that's when I really opened my eyes to more the modern and contemporary route that I'm, still choreograph today. And then my senior year of college, I was lucky enough to be enrolled in a dual credit class that actually ended with going to Ghana, Africa for 3 weeks and studying dance. Fell in love with Ghana and Accra, where we were staying, which is the capital. And then, after graduation as an artist, we're kind of like, what the heck are we going to do with our lives? And so I ended up going back to Ghana for 6 weeks and teaching kindergarten. I lived in a small city, Hohe, and lived among the people and, kind of still fell in love with that African culture. So that's honestly my favorite style of dance. I think that there's something really beautiful about the African culture, how dance is integrated in a way that just in America it's not. There were children that were 4 or 5 years old, you're sitting at dinner and they're just, for lack of better terms, and because you can't see me demonstrate it, they're gyrating their hips and doing things, but it's not sexualized. America sexualizes everything. And so I think the body is meant to move. And so that's something that African dance continues to inspire people, that, moving your hips is not seductive. It's actually like your hips are meant to move forward and back, side to side. Same thing with your chest and your arms, they're meant to move. And so when I came back from Africa that second time, I always said, like, if I was going to teach dance, I was never going to sexualize it, or I was never going to tell someone no because of their size or their look. And that's something which very much contradicts competitive dance, or the stigma of competitive dance. You think about that, show dance moms that people say you have to look a certain way, you have to kick a certain height. And so that's always been something I've fought against in the competitive dance world. If you look at my my company of dancers, I have tall dancers, short dancers. I have dancers that can kick themselves in the face. I have dancers that can't do splits. And so I'm never going to tell a student no because of something that is physically not meant to happen. Dance isn't, Western dance or ballet isn't necessarily natural. Forced turnout is not natural. Russian ballet is not natural. But African dance is. And so, yeah. That's a very long-winded version of African dance is my absolute favorite.
Absolutely. And so after you went to school, you took all these classes, you traveled the world, you took all these worldly experiences, and you met your husband.
Yep.
You have a baby. Through all this, you decided to kind of step away from a little bit more of the expressive art, and you have created a whole studio based on competition. Can you kind of explain what competition is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there's a very clear delineation in competition and competitive dance of there's the trophy chasers, which are the students that, or the studios that bring their students to competition purely to come back and have a huge trophy. So there's dance competition where you go, you compete, you get a trophy, you leave. I don't participate in any of those. What I participate are dance conventions, which have a competition aspect of those. So every convention that we go to or I bring my students to has a 2 to 3 day workshop with some of the top professionals in the United States and abroad in their specific genres or disciplines, on top of preparing pieces and then getting feedback. So that's kind of the big thing for me being in Missoula, Montana, and coming from, the Boston area, New York area, and then my husband coming from Los Angeles. When we decided to stay in Montana and kind of put down roots, how do we bring the coast or a bigger city feeling and expectation to these Montana kids? And for me, traveling to these larger conventions helps me show these Montana kids, or Missoula specifically kids, oh my gosh, now you're taking class with Joe Lanteri, who's the owner of Steps on Broadway and, the jazz professor at Juilliard. Or you're taking places or class and getting to know Dana, who was, the assistant choreographer or associate choreographer, of In the Heights, the movie. Or So You Think You Can Dance Stars, or all those things. They're getting exposure to that and saying, oh my gosh, there's a world of dance around us. Yes, it's awesome if they score well or they get adjudicated, but it's 3 people's opinion, right? And then we come back and we get to listen to it. And sometimes I agree with it and sometimes I don't. But more than anything, the things that I think for me, it's yes, you can rotate more. You can, the technique of it is black and white for dance when it comes to ballet or jazz or certain things. In ballet, you rotate your knee out to the side in a passe. So if you're turning on, if you're doing a pirouette, which is a simple turn, and your knees out to the side, then you did it right. If your knees turned in, you're wrong, you deduct score. So from that, there's a very black and white aspect of it. But then you get into the section of the adjudication, which is the creative aspect or the choreography. I'm lucky enough where I never really get docked there because the stuff that we create or put on stage is. But it's also subjective, which is hard. Creating dance is an art, which I think you're most intrigued about, is it's an art form that you're putting up for critique, especially with children. But I think there's so many life skills that they're learning throughout that process of, how do I go back to the studio on that Monday morning after a weekend long of classes and work harder? How do I take that positive affirmation of I scored a high gold, whatever, top adjudication. How do I come back and still work harder?
Yeah.
How do I be better? How do I, at the end of the day, I bring 15 kids that have all solos. One of them is going to be the top scoring. How do they negotiate that and still be a good person? And then how do the person that we know got the lowest score, how do we negotiate that and lift them up as their team member as well? So there's a lot of life skills that competitive dancers learn as well.
Yeah.
But once again, for me, the competitive dance aspect is the exposure to the world outside of Missoula, Montana. There's a lot of competitions that come into the Montana area that are you go, you dance on a stage, you get a trophy, and you leave. And I'm just not That's just not why I go.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of videos of competition, and it is a lot of repetitive. Hip-hop, I'd say, is the most common thing. And pop, lock, drop, bum, bum, bum. And in your most recent recital, which you showcased a lot of the things that you bring to competition, what I really appreciated was what you've been talking about is all these different aspects of dance. You have African dance, you have modern dance, my favorite, musical theater. Like, I just don't get how competition just doesn't have more of this.
Right.
And I really appreciate how you have that within your own craft. And like you were saying, when students will come back after a competition, they have this feedback. They get a score. And I can understand how that would definitely drive them to get even better. But at the same time, I feel like it could be a little degrading. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. To dance among your peers or to anyone and get a score that you're not happy with or hear feedback that you may not want to hear. I mean, there have been judges that have said, maybe you should try this style instead of this style. It's like, what? But I think it's also very interesting because that one time that they do it. So I get very mama bear over my students, right? So I'm like, that's the best one they've ever had. Like, why would you not score it well? But they're not part of the journey. That's one particular performance that they're seeing. And so it's reminding the students and myself as a mentor for them, looking at the journey and putting it in perspective of, okay, so you may have scored, which it's just asinine too how they score because it's a gold is middle of the road, right? So it's most competitions that I go to, take my students to, it's bronze, silver, gold, high gold, and then either a platinum, a stop the clock, a blah, 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 blah. Okay?
Super diamond.
Exactly. So gold is like middle of the road. So when students come back and they tell the general uneducated public about the dance program, they're like, I scored gold. Everyone's like, yeah, that's awesome. And they're saying it in a degraded way. And so it's my job as a mentor and as their instructor and teacher is saying, okay, so this is where you're starting. Where do we go from there? And so I think that it's almost me more as a teacher when they do score something that they're not happy with, that I use it as a, why did we get this score? What can we do better? But what did we also do well? And that's the hard part about being the teacher is you have to spin it in a way that's positive. And there are students that I've had that have gone on and earned amazing adjudications, and I think that's why I'm lucky to use them as examples now that I've been, this is my 10th season doing this, so a decade of this. My younger ones that get upset with, if they score X, Y, and Z and they ski others, but there's also a formula to it. And I figured it out a little bit. So, my top scoring dancer, her name is Olivia. She's going to be a senior this year. Incredible dancer. She's absolutely insane, right? And she's the kindest, most humble, beautiful individual you'll ever meet and inspires all. Her very first solo she scored a high silver, okay? So it goes silver, high gold, top adjudication, wherever you go. She scored a high silver. My mini this year, same age as her, first solo, scored a high gold. And she thinks just because she didn't score what Olivia scored, she's not like, I didn't do. Whereas Olivia then comes back and goes, girlfriend, I scored a high silver when I was your age. And they're like, oh, that's amazing. That's awesome. But I've had 10 years of experience, of, okay, I know this move works. I know this music works. I know how to work with this student and highlight and showcase what they do well. But it's the journey. But I think at the end of the day, Olivia's journey is a lot more interesting than my newer students because they're expecting high adjudications because that's what they only see now, as opposed to, my most recent graduate, Elena, when she started the same time as Olivia or the year before Olivia, our group pieces were scoring high silver, and now some of my students that first time in company, my competitive team, are coming home with all platinums, which is the top adjudication. And they have no concept of what it's like to work, right? So I think I'm in a little bit of a shift mode as my studio's experiencing more success. How do I put it in perspective for them? But at the end of the day, the end goal is not the trophy. The end goal is not the award. How do I choreograph? There's more and more becoming a formula. The more dance I sit for hours and watch, all these pieces. But I think competitive dance also, at least the conventions that I go to, because the ones I appreciate, a majority of those, the adjudicators are collegiate professors who actually, teach Monday through Friday and then tour on these, whereas I choose that for a reason. They're going towards more of the collegiate style dance. And so I feel like my collegiate background, the more I've pulled from that, the more successful my pieces have been.
Well, speaking of success, you've talked about the students going into a competition and receiving a score, and we're in your studio right now, and the walls are just covered in awards. You have plaques, you have medals, you have trophies, and that's a way to gauge the student success. But as artists, we're always in search for our own success within our craft. What is success for you? Do you feel like you're successful?
Yeah, I think it's... This is a hard question for me because
it's not supposed to be easy.
Yeah, I think we all define success differently, right? And as artists, a perfect example, which is as an artist and as an educator, two very underappreciated, I think, professions in our society as an overarching thing. My husband and I have kind of dedicated our lives to the arts and education, whereas, my younger brother is in finance in New York. So his definition of success may be the car he drives, the television Financial, whereas mine's never going to be that. For me, though, other success, I'm working really hard on not defining my own self-worth based on my students' success, but also at the same time, this past recital that we just had, being able to, at the end of the showcase, have so many people come up to me and say, I felt like I was transported out of Missoula. I felt like I was seeing a level of artistry between the costumes and the staging and the lights and the dance, the way the students handled them. Like, that to me is success when someone says, I don't feel like I was in a small town in Missoula. I was inspired and went home saying, I want to create now. So success to me is leaving someone thinking more when they leave not just like, oh, that was cool, but like thinking about what they saw and inspiring others to want to do that is success. Or understanding or wanting to have, a conversation with me about what my process is. Like, this to me is success because someone else is thinking about what I'm doing.
Well, you're welcome. How do you start your creation process? Speaking of creating, when you are given the next competition or your next recital, how do you go about it? Do you start with music? Do you start with your students coming to you with a question? How do you start?
Yeah, I think that's a really obviously fantastic question, but it's different every time. A lot of times I hear a piece of music and I envision something. So it drives my husband nuts, but I drive mostly in silence in the car because my work is music. So if I'm driving somewhere, I'm always choreographing in my head, or I'm envisioning a piece of music and how someone can be moving through the space in that. So quiet is the opposite. So music usually inspires me. So if I do have music or I'm starting to think about work, it's usually music. I also think about the specific job that I'm tasked with. So if I have a firecracker little 8-year-old, I'm going to look for something that I can envision them doing well, say a solo. So I have a student, Zoe. She's 9 years old and she's a firecracker. That's the way I describe her. So, I'm going to think about the moves that I'm going to want to highlight that she does well. But then, for instance, I did a piece, Hadestown, which is inspired off of the musical. My husband and I went to see it in New York in 2019, right before, the world shut down. And I couldn't stop listening to the soundtrack. And I was like, this just has a really cool undertone. But how do I juxtapose the musical theater aspect with it with the contemporary collegiate dance style that I'm really passionate about too. Because there's such a disconnect with collegiate dance sometimes, and like people go to see it and they're like, what the heck just happened? And I'm one of those people, you know, and so by layering it with music that inspired me and then trying to connect the two, sometimes people are like, oh, I get it. I get it now. Like, I get how this movement sequence can inspire you with the music layered on top. So usually I find a piece of music that I'm inspired by for whatever, you know, the given cause is. And then I'll sit down and I'll think, okay, is this a large group of people that I envision, or a singular person? Or is it a small group? So I'm really excited about, so I'm in conceptual phase for next season, right? So recitals ended, and I have a senior next year that I really want to feature, Olivia. I've already talked about her in this podcast. And she's just a gorgeous mover. Like, everything she does is very interesting to me. Like, she can stand there and just breathe, and you're like, wow. You know? So there's this piece that I'm like, I really want to do a really beautiful lyrical piece for her. Lyrical is kind of that blend of ballet and jazz, but it tells a story, lyrical. And so I was driving in the car the other day, and this is why I don't listen to music, because I was choreographing, and the song Flowers came on, and I was like, I see the color sage green. I see Olivia being lifted by like 4 people, and I need 2 people like doing something opposite at the same time. Okay, I want 6. That's how it comes. So it's like, I know that in my company auditions on June 10th, I'm looking for 6 dancers that can dance around Olivia, and 4 of which have to be able to lift her up.
All inspired by silence in the car.
Exactly. You know, so that, and then from there, I get in the studio and I move around. Right? And how does it make me feel? You know, dance is a lot from the solar plexus, if you think about, you know, the different chakras, if you're into that. And it's the color yellow, which is really funny because that's my favorite color. And so it's like from the soul. But yeah, for that particular piece. And then sometimes it's on a whim. I'm like, okay, there's a piece of music, jazz recital, Vogue I did this year. Ended up loving it, but I was like, I need a piece from the 90s. It was a theme, iconic, great. It's now one of my favorite pieces I've ever choreographed, you know, but yeah.
I think one of my favorite thing about your pieces, which it's interesting because most of your pieces are about 3 minutes or less, if not 2 minutes or less. These tiny pieces have story, and your choreography somehow are able to tell a story within that time frame. And I really appreciate that as a storyteller myself in the musical theater. And I think this is me just kind of projecting here, but I believe your history with musical theater really drives that storytelling and really gives your pieces a purpose. And no offense to your Vogue piece, well, I didn't get much out of it.
Right, exactly.
It was pretty. They go over here, and you can kind of tell that this was choreographed for competition.
Right.
But then I see Olivia's piece, which she choreographed, by the way, which I also love that you do at the studio, is you inspire students to push themselves and find themselves. And like you said, she might have gotten a high silver, but she learned how to choreograph. And let me tell you, that piece that she choreographed was my favorite piece in the entire recital.
Solo or flat, the group piece?
Flying.
Yeah. Right? Because it feels, and I think that's the other, they're all senior level dancers, right? And when the moment they walked into the studio to now, they leave you feeling something at the end of the day. And you're still thinking about it. Like, why did that make me do something or feel something?
What inspires you? What gets you to feel those feelings? We talked a little bit about the creation process, but really, what gets you inspired? I know you have a son, and I know he probably influences you every day, but artists always come up with creative blocks, which I'm sure you run into a lot. With how many students do you have?
I think we have 240 this season.
240 students.
Yes.
I'm sure you run into a creative block eventually. What inspires you? How do you overcome creative blocks?
Oh, yeah. So this is more like a personal thing. But when I started my studio, I didn't expect to start it when I did. A lot of people, or what's very common in the dance educator world, if we're coming back to, you know, choreographer, dance studio owner, is you go out and you have a professional career, and then you start your studio, and it's kind of like, you know, a scientist teaches on the side to make money. It's not the end goal for a lot of people. And for me, it wasn't an end goal. And so what I wish I would have done, or what I wish I could have done, is my inspiration for a lot of what I create. So I graduated college and followed a boy out to Missoula, Montana, and did not marry him even though I was supposed to. And so I was kind of stuck here. My goal was never to live here. You know, I had plans to move to Astoria, New York when I was 23 with my best friend to get an apartment and do the audition thing. And life unfolded the way it did. And I, 10 years later, own a studio at 33 when I was expecting to open a studio at 35. And so if I was still in the physical shape, what would I be wanting to dance? And that's a lot of what inspires me and the movement style that I have. So you'll see my dance always has a lot of turns and a lot of jumps because it's what I wish I would have been able to do. And also what I want my students to have that I may not have had, which is a choreographer, director that sees them for who they are and what their individual talents are.
So you're trying to give a little bit of you on the stage, but also showcasing the student as well. Wonderful. Do you have any hobbies? Things that get you away from the studio? Things that might complement the studio?
Yeah. No, I don't.
I did say you have a 2-year-old.
Yes, I have a 2-year-old that takes up most of my time. My husband tells me I need to get a hobby so that I don't burn out, which burnout is a real thing.
Which, by the way, you did just have this ginormous 240 student recital, which we had mentioned a few times, and that's why somebody might be a little tired right now.
But my hobby, my hobby and what I still do for myself and my husband encourages me to do is when I get to choreograph for musicals still.
Mm-hmm.
So doing shows at MCT, doing Big Fork, I go up to, and for summer stock. Those are things I do for me. And so those creative processes, but it's still choreographing. So no, it's not healthy. I don't do much other than
it's different though.
But yeah, it's different and it's not around the same thing, and that's why I'm really looking forward to, I've gotten an offer from MCT to do a show that's 18 and older, which is exciting and enticing to me because my 40 hours a week is with children. Mm-hmm. And, I leave my own child to go spend time with other children. But I don't really have hobbies and I don't have time for me to go and dance for myself anymore unless I'm creating work for other people. And so it's definitely maybe shopping. Shopping could be a hobby.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's not a good hobby on my current income. But no, I don't. Other than playing with my son, I actually like interior design too.
There you go.
Spring break, I was really bored, and so I painted a huge sun on our bedroom wall.
If you could give yourself any advice, would you wish that you had a hobby?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say, and I would also tell myself, if I could give myself advice, which I did this year, is I took the studio email or my work email off my phone because I spend way too much time on my phone. And that's part of being, I think, a studio owner as well, like a small business owner. But I don't get to leave the work at work because it's my livelihood.
And it's a tough balance because you're also got to be on your phone for your job too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it's just an easy way to get lost in the emails and the social media and
I think that's one of the hardest things about the industry, that competitive dance industry, social media. Because someone is always seeing something and trying to do it better now. And the perception of, so we have these kids that are whacking themselves, behind the head now with their legs because they saw someone on social media that could do it, this high, and then they're trying to do it this high. And so all of a sudden, I have to stay up with what the trends are a little bit because what the kids want to do. But also, there's nothing, it's turn dance a little bit like TikTok. I think there's an influx in hip hop because people think that TikTok is hip. TikTok dances are hip hop, which are not. And it's almost an insult to the hip hop culture because it's not the same thing.
Right.
But some studios are trying to monetize on it and actually having TikTok classes, which kids come and learn, like the renegade dance. That was back in 2020. I'm outdating myself already. But it's a thing. Fortnite was a huge thing. People were offering Fortnite camps where we'd learn all the dances that the Fortnite characters would do. I mean, it's infiltrated into the art form.
I mean, it's almost a competition in itself of just social media, which is one of my least favorite aspects of social media. But,
Yeah.
wow, yeah. Speaking of advice, would you have any advice for an aspiring choreographer or somebody who wants to join competition? Do you advise going to school? Do you think just like going out and auditioning is the best way to go about it?
Yeah, so that's twofold, I guess. So my question is, an aspiring dancer and an aspiring choreographer?
Let's hear both.
Both? Great.
Yeah.
So as a choreographer, trust yourself. Someone is going to love what you create. Just because one person doesn't love it doesn't mean that it's not right for someone else. And you have to remember that, especially if you're going to put your work up to be judged. Just because 3 people on a panel may have had different opinions of it, it's 3 people. And that somewhere someone is going to love what you did, and you should love what you did. If you're proud of what you put on stage, then that's all that matters. For a competitive dancer, the same thing. There's a spot for everyone. You need to find an instructor or a teacher that values you, who you are, and what you have to give, and doesn't see you for your limits, but sees you for your abilities. Because the right choreographer can create something that is perfect for everyone. But you have to be open to creating work for, as the choreographer, you have to also give and take. It's a lot different choreographing for an 8-year-old than it is an 18-year-old. But, I think that that's the biggest takeaway, is that if you, in the arts community, but in the dance community specifically, you need to find a choreographer that values the dancer, and you need to have a dancer that values the choreographer. And just because the choreographer has 10 million likes on social media doesn't mean they're the right choreographer for you, and doesn't mean that they're going to set the award-winning piece. And I've had some students that have struggled with this year. And then I have a student, Olivia, who's choreographed her own piece and doesn't even have a social media, super presence. She maybe has 1,000 followers, and she's, scoring a 98 out of 100. And she may have scored a 99 if it was 3 different judges.
Right.
But I think it's pretty universal that dance is for everyone. Your body's meant to move. And just don't forget that.
I love that. Dance is for everyone. I want to, actually, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that I do believe that you believe that dance is for everyone, because you teach everyone. You teach 2-year-olds to 20-year-olds to adults. You've taught different styles. You've taught tap. You've taught African. You've taught hip-hop. You've taught ballet. You've taught to all abilities. One of my favorite things about Showtime is you have an all abilities class. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So 6 years ago, we had a student, his mom actually reached out to Showtime because she owns a daycare. And she wanted to bring her daycare in for something to do on a day of the week. And then she asked me when she came in and kind of loved the space, do you do classes for students with, any sort of American labeled disability? And I was like, I've never really gotten into that. I don't know much about it. And she's like, well, I have a son with a traumatic brain injury. He has paralysis on his right side, but he just loves to dance. And so I spoke with some of my instructors and actually sent one of them who had an individual passion for working with special needs per se, sent her to a training in Helena with this company called Access Dance Company, which is based in California, and it's an all abilities professional dance company. And she came back and we piloted this program called Danceable, and it was for students of all abilities. So some had autism, some had traumatic brain injury, some were in wheelchairs, complete, nonverbal. And she did kind of creative movement style dance, and then our piano teacher, Anne, actually accompanied it on the piano. And then that sort of morphed into Tyler, our dancer's kind of love for dance. So then he started private lesson. And by the end of his private lesson, it happened at the same time my competitive company was rehearsing, and he'd come in every time and want to watch. And it was actually, the piece was that that I was creating for them was from Heathers the musical, but it was a song about a girl named Veronica, and he just wanted to see Veronica. Like he called the dancer Veronica, and he just, at the end of every private, he wanted to come in and see Veronica. And he wanted to be in company. And his mom was like, what do we do? How do we do this? And I just said, we'll figure it out. And so, fast forward 5 years, this is gonna be his 5th year and final year in company because he's a graduating senior. And we've integrated movement so that, if it's a full company piece, he can lift his left arm all the way above his head. So if it's full company and it's all dance, we do left arm because he can do it. We always put him in a place where he's able to watch someone in front of him because someone that he aspires to or looks to be, and then someone on either side, just so that he has kind of that awareness of when the group is shifting front and back. But he's now integrated into almost all of our classes. So then he wanted to become a teacher assistant, which is a program we have. And it's where students, minimum age of 11, started assisting teachers. And so we brought back, finally after COVID kind of put a halt in our danceable program. We brought it back this year, and we started the group class. There were 7 of them, and he was the teacher assistant for it because his actual knowledge of dance is so much higher than the rest of his peers. And I have a new teacher who loves working with kids and is going to school for education. And, all my teachers love working with kids, but she especially likes working with students of all abilities, and she's inspired all of them to dance. But your body's meant to move, and even if it's paralyzed, it's meant to move, I guess. But yeah, he sees no limits, and we should see the world like he does a little bit. It's really interesting because being on competitive dance, breaking those boundaries and the stereotypes. I brought him to his first competition 2 years ago, and the looks that he was getting from other studios was just like, who is this kid? What is he? Because he, the time was a 15-year-old in a 15-year-old's body, but the mentality of a child that has half a brain, and I had 35 kids at the time there, and they were so used to it and normal that they started looking back at kids that were just like, why are you staring at us? Like, this is Tyler. He's part of our group. And at that specific competition, Olivia, I keep bringing up this one student, apparently I'm very proud of her, was the first overall top scoring soloist. And so once you're the top overall, right, everyone knows who you are in the room. So 200 plus kids. And he stood right next to her, and she talked him through all of the classes. And from the first class to the last class, he was just normalized because she normalized it. Mm-hmm. And the rest of her peers from Showtime normalized it. And we have to normalize it. We have to normalize that dance is meant for everyone, whatever capacity that is, whether it's you're able to blink your eyes and move in your heart, in your soul. That's what dance is. And that's why it frustrates me, because there's this stigma with competitive dance that's been created that, you're a competitive dance studio, so all your dancers have to look like Barbie dolls and they have to do X, Y, and Z. And that's just not the case. And I was met with that, in the prime of my high school years, where it was like, oh, you aren't tall enough, or you're, not a 00, you're a size 2, so you can't fit into the costume. And so that's always been my mantra, is like, no, dance is for everyone. And Tyler's just a shining example of it's literally for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the in the recital, the All Abilities class had a piece based to the music from Space Jam.
Yeah.
And it was my favorite part of the whole show. It was so much fun.
And then they clapped for themselves afterwards.
They clapped for themselves. But the teacher you're referring to, when it was their time, she would go around and tap them on the head, and it would be their time to freestyle. And that was killer.
It-
I mean, they got to go up and express themselves in ways that they might not have ever known they could. And what happens? The crowd erupts. And it just it brings a tear to your eye. It breaks your heart a little bit. And it's so cool that these students get to have that ability.
And there's one student that actually came to our open house that was in the dance abilities class that wants to enroll in more classes because he was so inspired by what Tyler was doing. So he's enrolling in hip hop and musical theater next year in top of that. And it's like, okay, so Tyler might be leaving in a couple of years, but he's opening the door and he's breaking boundaries in ways, and we need to keep that alive. But that was so exciting to me that he came in, and was excited to try to add, wanting to add more dance classes, and that it was not even a question or looked at differently.
Amazing. Switching gears a little bit, how do you handle criticism? I know in competition you will get some negative comments. And also in other art forms, we will always get criticism, whether that be good or bad. How do you handle that? Do you like to brush it off your shoulder? Do you like to take it to your heart and try and work on it a little bit?
I think it depends on what the situation is. So if I get criticism about, say, the way I dress a dancer on stage, that's something I'd be like, oh man, yeah, I can see that point of view. I didn't look at it that way, but maybe that looks wrong. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to try to view it and really take that, not personally, but take it seriously. Very rarely do I ever get that comment, but that's just something that's like, very tangible to fix. I think that if it's something about a piece of choreography commenting on maybe, the movement sequence or something like that I've actually come up with, I do take it personally because it worked for me. But I think with time, you continue to realize, and I continue to remind myself, well, it worked for me and it may work for someone else, but it just didn't work for you. I think the criticism that I don't handle well and I continue to work on for myself is when a student takes it personally. So I think part of my acting degree comes in really well in the fact where I can perform and be strong for them, in the sense where I stand up for if they don't like or they think that they need to straighten their knees and I know it's something they've been working on all year. I'm like, yeah, but you wouldn't have gotten that note if they didn't notice that you were doing that, which means they were drawn to something about you and so they just want you to get better at it. And then I go back to my hotel room and I'm just like, why didn't I see that? Or like, why did I have them do that if they would? So I think I still beat myself up over or take very personally what I could have done better. So I think that's a thing, but I think more than anything, when a student chooses to no longer do competitive dance when they've done it, I think that's the hardest. That's not even necessarily a criticism, but that's the thing I take most personally. Yeah. Because it's like, what could I have done differently? But a lot of times it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with so many outside factors. But I think that's the one that I'm still learning to negotiate in a healthy way because everyone says, well, you'll have another so-and-so or there'll be another person, but there isn't. Each one of my students, especially on my competitive team, I spend a minimum of a, part-time job with number of hours. And so each child means something to me. And their journey means something. And so when a child no longer continues their journey, I do take it personally because I'm like, why don't you choose me? So I think that's the hardest criticism. I can deal with what other people have to say when it comes to judges or opinions. I've worked really hard for that. But I also am really proud of what I do. And I know where my students have come. And I know that the battles that they have coming from a relatively small town. But when a student chooses to no longer participate after participating for many years, if it's a student I see potential in, which I technically see potential in all my students, otherwise I wouldn't put time and energy into them. Yeah, I wouldn't be here.
I like what you said a little earlier. Criticism should be handled seriously, but not personally.
Right.
I like that. I really do. Is there any misconceptions about your craft?
Yeah.
Or should I say, are there any misconceptions about your craft?
I think that there are misconceptions in choreography that we only do dance. A choreographer, I think, doesn't get the recognition that they deserve a lot of times. Because as a choreographer, you are very easily we could easily transition to like an artistic director. Because as a choreographer, specifically for competitive dance, we're thinking about spacing, we're thinking about costuming, we're thinking about music editing, we're thinking about, so it's not just dance. As if I say I'm a choreographer, I'm not just thinking about the dance, I'm thinking about the whole, like, kind of like you said, for me, at least it's like the whole story, the whole picture, the whole experience in that moment. And choreographers have to plan spacing, timing, cuts, choreography. If it doesn't work, we can think on our feet. So from a choreographer from the point of view of like a choreographer, there's so much that goes into it more than just the dance. If we just came up with an 8 count, that might be something that takes us 5 minutes. But to put together a piece, there's so much more that goes into it. And we are overall like the director, the musician, all those things in one when we're creating a piece of competitive dance. And then, you put it on a stage for a show, and it's like now we're lighting and all those things. And there may be choreographers out there that are like, this is the dance I don't care about. The look, I don't care about anything. So for me, personally, a choreographer is the lighting designer, the costume designer, the staging, all those things.
They're dipping their toes in everything.
Yeah, and we, our brains go multiple different ways. I also think that we, as choreographers, can be cool. Like, everyone has the misconception that you're Madame Giry from the Phantom of the Opera, where we walk around with canes and sticks and hit kids and just don't think. And maybe that's more of a dance teacher thing, that we value, the like prissy, pointy nose witch-like look. But that's not who most choreographers are nowadays. And then with the craft of dance specifically too, you actually have to be really smart to be a dancer. It's not just your body. The education behind, and I'm lucky because in my program I hire all of my instructors are, either have excessive performance experience or are college educated dancers, which I think is a different style of teaching dance because we come at it from an academic point. But as a dance teacher, you have to understand the body. You have to understand and have a very innate way of connecting emotion, which is an intangible thing, to a physical thing, and emoting those two things together. And it takes a really intelligent person to be able to do that. And so I think that people think, oh, they're dancers, so, they can dance, but there's not much else there. And that's why it really bothers me when people say, don't just get a degree in dance, because that doesn't mean anything. I have my BFA in dance. You have to be able to think for yourself to be an educated dancer. And dance today is moving in a world where it's hopefully bettering the world. It's not just for show. Dance can make a statement, and people are using dance as both an outlet to express themselves, to find themselves, but also, say something. And you have to be an intelligent individual to do that. Yeah.
Wonderful. As we wrap things up, I want to know what's next for the world of competitive dance. Mm-hmm. I usually ask this question in the art form because we are seeing a rise of technology. Do you find technology influencing competition, as well as what I emphasized before when I watch your pieces, which I feel are musical theater driven? It's very different than other forms of competition. Do you think that there will be other styles of art forms being integrated into competition?
It's funny you say that because This year, for the first year, one of the large overarching umbrella companies that runs a couple of the competitions that we go to allowed the use of, you could actually make lighting requests and technological add-ons or sets and props, where that used to not be a thing. And so I do think that it's getting a lot more technical in the sense of literal, like, lights and sound and timing of things. But it also goes back to social media and advancing the dance and the expectation of what dancers can do, because there's always the next best thing, and how high your legs can go, how many turns a student can do. And we portray, they catch that one video, but they may have done it 17 times to get it to look that way. And so I think that's always going to be that competitive edge that makes it that much harder and more elite. I also think that...
But social media can also mean more accessibility.
It could, absolutely. I think that that's right. I think that it's accessibility to potentially the knowledge, but not necessarily for the students to do it in a healthy way, though, too. Mm-hmm. So what scares me is, the students that are doing these ridiculous tricks that we think are amazing, but maybe not having the spotting because they're doing it at home in their bedroom and then filming it for a TikTok. And then they come in with a lower back injury. So I think we're going to be continued to be wowed by not human abilities of dance that are happening. The flexibility, the turns, I want to use words that are accessible. So, the extensions, the lines, the things that people can do. But I do think that what is cool is, from technology, the integration, I hope, of worldly dance becomes more accessible. I do think that that's something that technology has advanced, is the, to take a class from Africa, here in the United States, if it's zoomed in. That wasn't even really thought of 10 years ago as opposed to now. So maybe it's integrated in that sense. But yeah, I hope that it continues to be. I'm not going to change what I do.
Well, my challenge for you is to incorporate more different art forms in competition, and take that or leave it. But like I said, watching your competition pieces, the ones that really stuck out to me, I'm not a judge, were the ones that had different art forms in them. The musical theater, there were some modern pieces, there was some tap pieces, and to me they just stood out more than just those, no offense, Vogue pieces.
Right, exactly.
That's my challenge to you.
I love it.
What's next for you personally? Do you have any projects coming up?
So this summer I'm headed to do some choreography at a couple different places. I'm taking a little bit of a step back from teaching this summer, which will be a nice break for me. But honest and truly, I hired I have two incredible assistants, studio manager and assistant studio manager and choreography, company assistants, my competition company. And they're going to be doing a lot more next year. I'm trying to take a step back and kind of refuel that artistic block that, I try to avoid, and be a more present mom, actually. So my husband is starting a arts nonprofit, and so it's kind of my turn to maybe, hold down the ground a little bit for him to take more risks with that. And in return, stepping back a little bit from the amount of 80 hours I do, maybe to a normal 40. But yeah, I don't know specifically any other bigger things, but smaller projects, letting the studio flourish under the foundations that I've created, but being a mom right now.
And what's next for Showtime? How many competitions do you have lined up for the next season? How many recitals?
So our auditions are next week, and I've got about 40 students auditioning again, so maybe a little bit bigger than last year. We've got 4 competitions we're headed to. We've got a potential nationals in Las Vegas. We've got a winter show, which we do every other year, which is a whole nother thing. So we do a winter show. We have a recital in June. Kind of 6 or 7 large performances, but hopefully a little bit of time by the lake the near future.
Right. Enjoy the summer a little bit. And where can we see some of your work? Where can we see a little bit of your choreography?
So you can always check out my Instagram. That's Kowalchik90. Or if you follow us on ShowtimeAcademy.com. We always list what competitions we're going to, and they always live stream. So if you're ever interested in seeing that work live, just click onto their live stream. If you see, Showtime Academy is attending 24/7 in Bellevue, you can see, go on and click and watch. So.
And the Showtime website is also where you could register yourself or one of your kids to sign up for any of these classes, whether that be competition or just any dance classes. There are so many different classes offered. I've taken several myself, and they are just so much fun. She has a lot of different teachers that could teach all sorts of different things. I can't thank you enough for joining me and piquing my interest about your craft. And thank you to all my peakers out there. Please let me know if you have any special or unique artists or art forms that you think I should explore. Remember, creativity comes from the heart. Push yourselves, be kind to each other. I'm Scoob Decker, and thank you for helping me pique my interest.